everybody, we are live on the YouTube's Stelman Smith Jr. here from the Unapologetic Apologists channel. Actually, today on behalf of John Dunphy, if you are watching on JMD's channel, you can ditch that and just head on over to my channel. We're streaming the same thing there. No, I kid. I don't kid, actually. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I would very much appreciate if you would go over there, subscribe, hit the notification bell, because subscriptions don't necessarily mean a whole lot depending on the YouTube algorithm as far as it getting it out to people. In fact, on that note, the best thing you can do for the YouTube algorithm is to comment that makes sure that it gets out there more. We are doing a live Q&A today, so of course most of the comments are going to be read. The general rule is if you're watching this after the fact, of course, comment, leave a comment, and if the comment is sufficiently bigoted, if it commits many logical fallacies or is a terrible argument for God, then we'll read it on air because it'll obviously be indistinguishable from the rest of the content that you do find on this channel. And question of the day, as far as, again, if you're seeing this after the fact, or even if you're seeing this live right now, comment or put it in the live chat. Have you seen the recent video Sean McDowell released where he role plays an atheist? He goes to a university, and most of the college students actually don't know who Sean McDowell is, and so it's actually quite great. They really think he's an atheist, and he goes on there and he does, in my opinion, a great job of steel manning the atheist positions. But the question for you guys to comment on, I'm curious, is does he make you is he as annoying to you as he was to me? Obviously Sean McDowell is such a lovable guy, but when I was watching this and I see the way he's deliberately maneuvering the conversation, like on the one hand he is steel manning the atheists and the arguments that he's putting forward, but at the same time he's manipulating the conversation against some of the students in a way that annoys you, because he knows what he's doing, right? He knows that he couldn't get away with these arguments if he were making them, for example, against himself. If he himself as a Christian were to respond to these arguments, he wouldn't be able to get away with this kind of sleight of hand that he does. So yeah. So here's one thing. I do want to take your guys' questions, and as we go through, if you guys put questions in the live chat, I'm more than happy to take questions, read them on air. In fact, we might even try to contact John Dunphy. He's not here with us tonight, but we'll see if I can't FaceTime him and surprise him while we're on air, because I don't think he's watching at this particular moment. So we'll try to do that. But so yes, I am going to go through taking your guys' questions. That's going to be the primary focus of this episode. However, in the slow moments, in the in-betweens, where maybe we're not getting as many questions coming in, I actually do plan to bring in the video of Sean McDowell making and responding to the atheist arguments he's putting forward. And I actually was, prior to doing this, I was thinking about preparing that for next week's episode. To prepare some specific clips and to prepare some specific responses. But then I thought, well, I haven't watched the entire thing, and I thought it might be useful for you guys to be able to see my off-the-cuff kind of responses without preparing. I think, obviously, there's a place for both. I don't think people should, in general, be lazy and not prepared, right? I mean, I think, for example, if you look at Braxton Hunter's channel, he in my opinion, his channel, Trinity Radio, is absolutely the best response channel, as far as responding to content out there, primarily from atheists, but even then from some other worldviews. His is absolutely the best, and obviously he's very prepared, and I tend to do that as well. However, it's also useful for you guys to see an off-the-cuff response, because, listen, a lot of the times if you're just out, maybe you're at college, maybe you're just out having a conversation with friends, having some coffee, obviously, if you're talking to an atheist or somebody from a different worldview, maybe Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't know. The point is you're not going to always be prepared for those conversations, and a lot of the times you find yourself kicking yourself afterwards because you think, I should have said this, and I know I found myself in that position quite a lot. So I do think it's useful to see something in action when it's off the cuff, because then you can get the idea of the general philosophical ways that you approach any given conversation, right? So it's like it's also a meta tactic in that sense. Not that I would, put myself up there as an example to follow in that. But I am a fan of Greg Koukl, and so we'll see how it goes. So yeah, so guys, start putting your questions in the live chat. I'm going to go ahead, since I don't see any questions just yet, bring in the video of Sean McDowell, and we're just going to go from there. So that's what this episode is going to be. Again, if you're just tuning in, subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment. Let me know what you think of Sean as we're going through this, and please feel free to put your questions in. But yeah, we're just going to jump right into this.
Hi. So you like to talk about philosophical arguments, correct? So I would like to know what you think about the world and its creation as a whole philosophically, and how the world, if it's so fine-tuned to its creation, how something bigger or outside didn't create it.
Okay, so I heard the first part. What do I think about the origin of creation? Repeat
Yes.
the second part for me again.
Yes, of course. Is that even a real question?
Fine-tuning, right?
Of course.
I'm sure you know what that
Oh,
is.
fine-tuning.
Yes. Fine-tuning. So if the world was so specifically made, and we assume that a greater force out there had created
Pieces that
what
have
philosophical
pineapples are
argument
clearly
against that?
fine-tuned for
Okay, so
deliciousness.
let me jump in. So
So
one is the question of, say, the origin of the universe creation. Now, I don't think the universe was created. I don't believe in creation because that word implies a creator and a mind. That's the very thing I'm not convinced that actually exists. So I actually think the data shows while our universe had a beginning, when you look at string theory, you'll find what's called the multiverse. And if you're following the shows like WandaVision and The Flash, like they toy in the multiverse in science fiction, but there's actually good reason to believe. Sorry if I ruined it for some of you. Too bad. You had time. Do you know who saved Endgame? Can I ruin that one for you? I'm kidding. I won't. The multiverse, I think string theory points towards that reality. So our universe had a beginning, but I don't think the multiverse did. It's eternal and it's always been here. And there's reasons for that we could go into. Fine tuning, if this were the only universe that existed, then I think we would be surprised that it happens to be so seemingly exquisitely fine tuned to allow life. But since it's not, and there's more probabilistic resources in the universe, I don't see why fine-tuning is a problem. In fact, if there is a multiverse, we wouldn't expect to find ourselves in a universe that's not fine-tuned because we couldn't live in such a universe. We'd expect to find ourselves in the very kind of universe that we do find ourselves in.
Okay, so let's go ahead and respond to both those points. So the point is, obviously, the Kalam cosmological argument for the beginning of the universe. If there was a beginning, there must be a beginner. We can go through all that. And then the fine-tuning. Obviously, if it's fine-tuned, there must be somebody who designed it specifically for our purposes. Now, with regards to the fine-tuning thing, he's really setting the student up for the traditional response there, which he's giving a very cliched response, which is, well, of course we shouldn't be surprised to find ourselves in the one universe of the multiple that's fine-tuned. And this is a very cliched kind of thing, but he knows as well as we do, obviously, that that's not an explanation. If someone asked you how you survived a plane crash, and you said, well, you shouldn't be surprised that I survived the plane crash, because otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you. It's just labeling the mystery. It's not explaining it. And he knows that. And I think he's setting up, that's kind of a softball to see how the student will respond. He's more devious on the first point, though, with regards to the Kalam, because think about this. What he didn't merely just state a multiverse. He kind of arbitrarily I don't want to say arbitrarily. What's the word I'm looking for? Not arbitrary. But he just appealed to string theory, and he did it to sound credible, right? He just appeals to something that he probably knows that any given person hasn't studied string theory in depth, so they're going to be kind of hesitant to comment it. So he just kind of, I guess you could not appeal to authority in the sense of a person, but appeal to authority in the sense of a science, where he just says, well, I think because of string theory, we can believe there's a multiverse. So he just kind of punts to string theory deliberately, because again, he knows people haven't studied in depth, so they can't challenge him on it to justify his thing about the multiverse. And then he goes from there to say the multiverse, therefore, is probably eternal. There's a couple of things people could say in response to that, especially if they studied Craig. They know, according to the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, that of the beginning of the universe, that even if there is a multiverse, the whole show needs a beginning, right? So you can't just punt to a multiverse and say, I think the multiverse is probably eternal. No, it's not. It needs a beginning. What I would go to personally, and this would, for me, bypass any kind of, again, punts to string theory, would just be say, I have philosophical arguments that for the finitude of the past, that the past can't be infinite in moments. And so those philosophical arguments would hold regardless of any speculation on string theory, which, by the way, he knows it's speculation, right? Probably if the student did push back, well, he would appeal to some study, but it's like appealing to quantum mechanics. When you have 10 different interpretations of the way quantum mechanics works, and you just pick the one that you like, that's probably what he would do with string theory. It's just this vague appeal to string theory. Let's see. Hold on, I just saw a comment come up. Yeah, where did the string theoretical landscape come from that has to be fine-tuned to exist? Well, so that's a good point. So that's where you could say the two kind of bleed together. So yes, he's kind of appealing to string theory just to justify his claim about the multiverse. But again, the philosophical arguments would hold. Even a multiverse would need a beginning, so it doesn't get you out of that problem. But yes, you are absolutely correct. It would need to be fine-tuned to bring about universes. And by the way, here's a point you can say to anybody who brings up the multiverse. So for example, there is no evidence for multiverse, period. Now I'm sure he has something planned to say if the student pushes back, which he's not going to. Not on that specific point. But one thing you can say to somebody about a multiverse is, that doesn't get you out of fine-tuning. Let's say I grant the multiverse. You still need an explanation for why this specific universe is fine-tuned. There's my man T jump. There's no evidence for God either. Look, fair enough. No evidence for God. We're actually going to have Joe Schmidt on the show to discuss kind of evidence for and against God, because he comes from the perspective of an agnostic, so where he evaluates the evidence. So he would disagree with this claim, but fair enough, T jump. I'm honestly grateful that you're here, brother, who fine-tuned God. Yes, very good. Well, I know you think that the definitions of God are arbitrary, but insofar as the definition is an infinite, uncreated creator, obviously wouldn't need to be fine-tuned, because you're not specifying specific limits of, he has this much power and this much knowledge and other stuff. But yes, I always get owned by T-Jump. I certainly did the first time I was on his channel. So I definitely appreciate him. But anyway, yeah, so so that's kind of just off the cuff things. I don't want to droll on too long about it. So yeah, we can go ahead and continue playing the video here. I think he might say something more on this. I don't know if I have anything to add.
Oh, she can go again. I have no power here. I didn't mute you.
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna have a follow-up question. So you pick specifically on the word choice of creator or creating. So whether or not we see that as God or something else, I just don't understand.
The philosophical arguments for the finitude of the past would still have to solve, so you can't just say uncreated for the multiverse. Unless you hold a B theory of time. I will grant you that. If you hold it to a B theory of time, there are ways, but then you'd still have the contingency argument to deal with. So
the multiverse, that's really what I mean by the universe. I don't think it had a beginning, hence it doesn't need any cause outside of the universe. Now, if you say that the universe needs a creator, then why wouldn't the creator need a creator? Why could the creator just exist, but the universe can't? That would be my question. So if you're going to be consistent,
because of the finitude of the past,
they both need some kind of cause, or they both just exist. You believe God.
And as Josh Rasmussen points out, you have the problem of arbitrary limits. The universe has limits, so you need specific explanations for those limits.
I see one up here. Any other?
And yeah, I wasn't saying there was anything wrong with appealing to string theory. What I was merely commenting on his deliberate tact in the way that he was doing so.
Try to get in as many as we can. So keep your hands up, and they'll come to you. Shh. Go ahead.
So you said earlier you weren't even sure if Jesus was a real person. I'm not talking about like if he was.
Oh,
God
this one.
Or like anything.
Hold on, let me pause it just to say something real quick, because I want you guys to pay attention to this next part. Quantum fields and string theory is outside of space-time, so it's a better solution to contingency. So I'm not educated enough to hold on, I'm trying to read a couple different things as they're coming in. So again, I'm not the expert on this. That is debated. I do know. I need to read up on it. But whether it's outside of space-time, whether you can speak of something like fields outside of space-time, that I wouldn't just grant that that's certain. Well, I would just ask you if you believe that the universe is not limited. Like, is there a limited amount of space? Like, if we say the universe is expanding, you're by default granting that the universe is limited in space, because otherwise it couldn't grow. If it was unlimited in space, for example, then it can't expand. So, but anyway, I do want to move on to this point about Jesus.
Sure, if he was real.
He might have been. I think the evidence is late and contradictory and legend filled, so I'm not fully convinced.
So the legend filled, would that be like the Roman who believed in the, like, his gods and everything else would be blasphemy and he'd hate everything? Even him saying that he was a real person is based on legend? That's what I just wanted to
Wait,
make sure.
Jesus saying he's a real person would be legend?
No, so the Roman saying Jesus existed and Jesus was a person.
Well, there's no good early Roman source that does.
Josephus.
Josephus was Jewish, for one.
He was a Roman historian.
Second, he was writing for Rome, but he was not Roman. Josephus was
That's my mistake.
Jewish. Josephus mentions 33 people by the name of Jesus.
I want you to pay attention to what
33
Sean does
people.
here, because this
Have
is
you
very
read the
deliberate. He
Antiquities
makes
of
an
the Jews?
unfalsifiable argument, and I want you to pay attention and
Okay,
see if you can
so,
spot why it's
listen,
unfalsifiable.
That's all right.
What he's about to
I
say.
would encourage you to read it. It's like saying somebody referred to Mike or John today. Jesus was a very common name in the Jewish world because it refers to Joshua, like a savior. So yeah, he refers to a bunch of people by the name of Jesus, but that's hardly reference to the historical biblical Jesus. Second reason I don't trust Josephus is in Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 18. Josephus allegedly refers to Jesus as risen on the third day, crucified, performing miracles, and being the Messiah. Would any Jew believe that? The answer is no. Jew by religion. Josephus is not quoted for the first 8 centuries of the church. It's not really the 10th century that any church historian quotes Josephus, because the passage that allegedly refers to Jesus was tweaked and interpolated and not actually written by Josephus. Yeah. Hey, good question. That's okay. I appreciate your.
Okay, so he had a 2-part to that answer, right? Now, first of all, I think one thing you can say is, you know, that there's something to be said for the tact of getting someone bogged down on Josephus, and that's obviously not Sean. Sean didn't do that deliberately. The guy in the audience, he's the one who brought up Josephus. So fair enough, that's on him for going down that rabbit trail. But I just want you to notice that, for example, when we're talking about debating the existence of a figure like Jesus, for example, and then you get bogged down on one specific person, Josephus, you can debate the specifics of Josephus all day, and that's ignoring a breadth of other historical evidence there is. And then somebody feels like, well, I got refuted on Josephus, I must have gotten refuted on the whole thing. No, you don't have to do that. You can go broader, and you can just even make it. I am surprised. Well, I shouldn't say I'm surprised nobody brings it up, because I haven't seen the whole thing yet. Somebody might bring it up, but I'm surprised somebody doesn't just generically say something like, hey, Bart Ehrman, an atheist, would laugh you out of this building and laugh you right out of this room if he were in here right now for saying, I don't know Jesus ever existed. So you can go with that. We don't have to get bogged down specifically on Josephus. But second of all, if you haven't noticed, the reason the argument he just made is specifically unfalsifiable is because he gives part 1, Josephus refers to over 33 Jesuses, and that's like referring to 33 Mikes nowadays, right? It's like, I refer to Mike, who the heck am I talking about, right? Like, just because I hear somebody referring to Mike, I can't say, and he's referring to over 33, you can't just arbitrarily pick the Mike you like. But I want to ask you something. Suppose you're reading somebody, say newspaper writer recording current events, and he refers to over 33 Donalds, right? But one of those Donalds, specifically he refers to is, hey, 45th President of the United States. Well, couldn't you kind of figure out which Donald specifically he's talking about at that point? Obviously, it would be Donald Trump, right? So, so you can narrow it down that way. But the reason that his argument is unfalsifiable is because he says, but if there are specifics about the Jesus Josephus is referring to, we can call those forgeries. And this is what people love to do with Josephus. They love to take advantage of the fact that there were indeed Christian forgeries of Josephus to make certain claims about Jesus more explicit. But what you can always say is the reason we know where the forgeries are in Josephus is because we also know what the legitimate writings from Josephus were. And so you can compare, and yes, in the legitimate writings of Josephus, you do have specific references to the Jesus that was talked about in the New Testament. Obviously, Josephus himself probably wasn't convinced of all the claims, but he at least referenced the claims from the perspective of the way the disciples were making them. So you do still get those details about the life of Jesus. But again, what he can do, he of course, because he's read all of this, and most of the college students have it, he can obviously get them all day on very specifics and say, no, this is a forgery if Josephus is saying something I don't like. But anyway, I do enjoy, I don't know if that's on my channel or John's channel, that the debate in the comments is going on, but I am enjoying watching that. But while you guys do that, I am going to go ahead and continue with this.
You're thinking, you guys are wrestling with these ideas here. I commend you for that. Go ahead.
So I have a question about the universe.
Okay.
So you said that the universe wasn't created, but how do you know that it wasn't created if we know that it is constantly dying? Like, we know that universe is expanding, right? So
It's Sean McDowell. Have some respect.
Energy is dispelling every second. Like, how do you know that it is? Sorry, the microphone is so weird. It's fine. Sorry. How do you know that it is endless if the universe is constantly dying?
Okay, let me jump in for a second. Because the echo makes it kind of hard to hear, state your question distinctly and clearly. And the first one was, if the universe is expanding, wouldn't it have had a beginning? Well, there's two things that can be said to this. Number one is there's good reason to believe we have an expanding and a contracting universe, kind of like a xylophone. And how would we believe this? Because as we look out further into the universe, we see red-shifted stars, which tell us on the longer wavelength of light that the universe is expanding. We also have some blue-shifted stars, which tells us that there's also contraction. So yeah, the universe is expanding, but I think it's also contracting as well.
But if it's expanding, shouldn't it be from the one point? Like from a single point? It should expand from somewhere.
Why did the universe have to come from something? Then you have to ask that question for God. Where did God come from?
Well, it should come from somewhere. Like, we can't deny that the universe was created and then it started to expand from one point.
I'm not sure I'm fully tracking, maybe because of the sound, but we have reason to believe the universe is expanding and contracting. If there was a beginning to this, you're still only dealing with our universe, not the multiverse. So it doesn't get us all the way to an explanation that would require God. That's my...
Okay, so yeah, there were two questions. One with regard to entropy, he kind of said if the universe is dying, there must have been charged up at some point, so to speak, and then he kind of gave the point about the expanding universe. And here's what Sean brought up. I know you guys probably can't see this. This is Craig's book, Reasonable Faith. Oscillating models. He discusses all of the, I shouldn't say all of them, he discusses a great deal of these alternate theories to the Big Bang. And these oscillating models, it's this idea of, like Sean said, an according or an expanding and contracting universe, and the idea that this can go on eternally. And the case is made they can't go on eternally for a couple of reasons. Again, number one, this is why I love the philosophical arguments for the finitude of the past, because they hold, regardless of any kind of alternate scientific theory, even if you found out that, yeah, at the Big Bang, that was just a contracting point, and prior to that, there had still been these expanding points, even if you could prove that, the philosophical arguments for the finitude of the past would still hold. They couldn't go on infinitely. But yeah, Craig does a good job about going about refuting them scientifically. Let me just go ahead, and I didn't plan to do this, so let's see what we're going to get ourselves into. I'm picking this part of the book because it's the shortest paragraph I see. I was going to start reading prior to this, but then you got like 2 pages I would have to read, and I don't want to put you guys through that because my reading isn't always the best. Not out loud. Anyway, so I'm just going to read this short paragraph here where he says, thermodynamics implies that the universe had a beginning. In certain respect, the evidence of thermodynamics is even more impressive than the evidence afforded by the expansion of the universe. For while an accurate physical description of the universe prior to the Planck time remains and perhaps always will remain unknown, thereby affording room for speculations aimed at adverting the origin of time and space implied by the expanding cosmos, no such uncertainty attends the laws of thermodynamics and their application. Indeed, thermodynamics is so well established that this field is virtually a closed science. Even though we may not like it, concludes Davies, we must say on the basis of the thermodynamic properties of the universe that the universe's energy was somehow simply put in at the creation as an initial condition. Prior to the creation, says Davies, the universe simply did not exist. So, fair enough, the student didn't have this to pull out at Sean at the point, but there you go. Let me get this back in here. And I don't think I've watched beyond this point, so I think this was the last where I left off the video. So we'll go about this for a couple more minutes. I obviously won't go through the entire video, but yeah, let's just get a couple of questions in here.
My question. Good. All right. I see a hand down here. I see a few in the back. Again, just if you don't mind, get as quickly to your question and distinctly as you can, please.
Okay, so earlier when you were
Real quick. So I don't want to challenge this just on the face of it when he says physics is greater than intuition. I think, look, fair enough, any kind of established science is going to be, like, for example, if you have, I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head, if you have, let's say, a cumulative case of evidence that convicts someone guilty of a crime, it doesn't matter that maybe you have intuitions about their moral character. The evidence would outweigh those intuitions. That being said, I feel like this might fall into, and I don't want to misrepresent you here, I feel this might fall into a kind of a broader claim that physics or science is greater than philosophy. That I wouldn't agree. I mean, obviously, for example, our intuitions of something about the law of non-contradiction, I think would be greater than, say, a speculative, claims about quantum mechanics that actually contradictions can exist. And I think, now granted, there can be debate about that. I know David Paulman has actually done some work on the law of non-contradiction and how it's actually much more sophisticated than we think insofar as arguments that can be made for it and against it. But I just wanted to offer that as food for thought. But let me continue here. Sorry.
for addressing Madison's question.
While we're talking, go ahead and pull your mask off, then we can hear.
So
There you go.
earlier, while you were addressing Madison's
How dare
question,
he.
you noted that the multiverse had to be an eternal type thing in order for the beginning of our universe to be created. So, going off of that, do you believe that the components of something created needs to be in that which created it? So, like, for example, with the creation of our world, we have intellectual minds. And from that, with the multiverse, how did the intellectual minds initiate or develop through something that didn't have that property?
Okay, so if I understand, you're asking the question of consciousness. How did a universe that seemingly at the beginning was physical do things like minds emerge through that process?
Yes.
Did I capture your question?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yes, the universe is physical. Wait, don't leave yet, because she might want to follow up. But there's certain capacities for what are called emergent properties at the right level of complexity and diversity to emerge. So take, for example,
I don't know if he's
hydrogen
written
and oxygen.
on it. Me and him have kind
They're
of
two
just discussed some
physical
things.
molecules or
But
elements.
I do plan to
put
have him
them
back on the show
together
soon to
and you
talk
have
about some
water.
stuff. I don't know if we
Now,
plan to
a
talk
new
about that specifically,
property
but
emerges
we might get
called
to it.
wetness. It doesn't exist just in hydrogen, doesn't exist just in oxygen, but somehow when these two physical properties emerge, these two elements emerge, you have this new property develop out of it. I think the same is true when it comes to the emergence of consciousness, that at a certain level of complexity, this new element, it's an epiphenomenon of consciousness, emerges like wetness. And what's interesting is you look throughout the evolutionary history of our world, and you can see simpler organisms aren't really conscious, but there's a basic awareness of pain. And then you have consciousness, and then you have self-consciousness. You have this increasing complexity go on as the evolutionary story unfolds.
So sorry, I'm thinking two things at once. I'm thinking about the Sean McDowell thing and T-Jump. Sorry, I can't read past my microphone here. So logic, I'm sympathetic to what you're claiming here, but I can't go all the way with it is the problem. So when we have this idea of like, do the laws of logic exist ontologically? And I think T-Jump and I both would want to say no, right? The laws of logic don't exist ontologically. I would be a non-realist when it comes to something like the laws of logic. I think fair enough. I'm not a Platonist, for example, nor do I think God created the laws of logic. So I think both T-Jump and I want to kind of affirm a non-realist approach here. However, I think it's also a mistake to say that they're merely language, right? Because things like the law of non-contradiction, it's not merely that we invent ways of talking about the universe. We have to come up with ways of talking about the universe to explain that it is the way that it is. There is something about reality. There's an explanation for why there can't be things like contradictions. And then, yes, we have a language to talk about why that is the case. But to say it's merely reducible to our language, I think, is a mistake, because then you don't have any richer explanations for why the universe is the way that it is. And still, I would still stand on philosophy being greater than science, because then you still have to, these are philosophical claims to talk about how do we interpret quantum mechanics. If quantum mechanics really does reject certain laws of the excluded middle, well, we have to have a philosophical framework for which we understand these scientific models and what it is that they're supposedly showing us. So, but anyway, sorry, back to Sean's claim. So he gave this example of how molecules can come together and have these emergent properties, so to speak. The problem is it's still matter. What she's asking question is, if at the foundation of reality all you have is materials, all you have is matter, how do you get something like consciousness, which consists of properties that aren't material? And then what he gave an example of an emergent property was still a material, right? It was a new kind of material, so to speak, if I would, again, to grant his premise fully. But you still have matter come together, matter and making more matter, even if the characteristics aren't entirely the same. And so that's just not a parallel to consciousness, right? If someone, in fact, this is kind of the opposite of the, what's the name of the fallacy? The fallacy of composition, I believe. It's like the opposite of the composition of fallacy. So often people who talk about how you can't get consciousness from material, they're accused of this composition fallacy, right? Where it's like, well, no one brick makes a wall. But of course, if you put all the bricks together, you can have a wall. So claiming that no one brick is a wall doesn't refute the idea that you can't put many bricks together and get a wall, and then they might even give the same. Well, the problem is you can't simply claim something like the composition fallacy, because some compositions are impossible, right? If all you had was red bricks, you would never get a blue wall. That would be an impossible composition. So if you, for example, the molecules he talked about, if you're just talking about hydrogen and oxygen, and you consistently put them together the same way, you'll always get water. You'll never get a tree, but the same. Now you can rearrange elements and get different things, but specifically the way he's talking about that probably wasn't the best example for me to give. But some compositions are indeed impossible. So just claiming a composition fallacy doesn't really do much to get one out of the problem here. So the question remains unanswered, even though it gave the example of water, is how you get these immaterial properties that are part of consciousness from purely material foundations, and he didn't answer the question.
Oh,
All right, we're going to jump up here. Go ahead.
If you don't follow an afterlife or a sort of meaning of life.
Well, no, it's not. If it's evidence that there aren't contradictions. If you have a hypothesis like there are contradictions and make a prediction which turn out to be correct, that's evidence there's a contradiction. Yes, but if contradictions are true, then it's simultaneously evidence that there aren't contradictions. So I think you see the problem there.
Right now, of sort of greater purpose, where do you personally and where do you suggest others find vocational motivation?
That's a good question. So let me answer this in a couple ways. I would presume.
Oh, I
correct
really
me if
like
I'm
this
wrong,
one. I did see
you
this
believe
one.
purpose
So we
is
might
a
end on this one. I
top-down,
think this was the last one I
that
watched.
God
We'll
has
probably end
made
on this one because I
world,
like this
He
example.
infuses it with purpose, and we find our purpose in God in some fashion. Is that fair?
Fair, yeah.
Okay. I think purpose comes from the bottom up. I don't think there's a God. I don't think there's a grand design. But as we look at this amazing story of evolutionary history, we have things like friendship, we have good food, we have knowledge, we have freedom. These are all good things that give our lives purposes, even if there is no God that exists. And I think as we look at human beings across different cultures, we find this common recognition that our lives can be purposeful.
But ultimate purpose, or just your subjective interpretation of purpose? And I wasn't planning on cutting him off there, but I'll just address it at the outset. This idea of, well, we have these things like friendships and freedom and good food. Some people don't. Some people find themselves in such a tragic position. And I could speak from personal experience here. I'm not going to. Some people do find themselves in a position where they don't think life is worth living because they don't have all of those things. And so they see an alternative route to, well, no, my life doesn't have meaning because I don't have any of these things. So maybe I'll take my own life. There are people who live that way out. An atheist, good. I'm genuinely happy for the atheists that can pull themselves up by their own existential bootstraps, but they can't prescribe that for anybody else. They can recommend it as a pragmatic way of living. But if other people don't find the meaning they do because they don't have the same things they do, that's all it is. It's recommendation. But there's nothing objective that you can transfer from one to the other. That person, by their own existential bootstraps, have come to the opposite conclusion you have. And then you just have two competing ways to live out that. But, sorry.
Even if there's no afterlife or they differ about God.
So, say if everything dies, if everything eventually will end, then why continue at all?
Why continue at all? Because I don't win in the end?
Correct.
Okay. Think about it this way. How many football players do we have here?
That's fair, but you'd have to give a very specific example
players
to conclude.
Okay. If we said
why the properties for
tomorrow,
one thing allow
we're having a
contradictions, properties for the other
scrimmage
thing don't.
against the Kansas City Chiefs. Even though you're going to lose, actually, they got smoked. You might beat them. Let's go with the Buccaneers. Okay? If you're going to play the Buccaneers, is there any chance you're going to win? The answer is no. You effectively have zero chance of winning, maybe negative chance. How many football players would be like, I don't care. I get to get on the field with Tom Brady and with the Buccaneers. I'm playing anyways. How many of you would still play? because you want to get on the field with those
Of course,
guys.
some would still play, but
Right?
some wouldn't.
That'd be
Again,
awesome.
when you expand the football game to
So
life,
even though you
some
can't win,
even if you say
so to
most people
speak,
choose
in
to
the
play,
end,
some
it
people don't.
doesn't
And the
mean
question
that
is
experiences are not
there anything
valuable.
objective about their meaning?
In
Is there an
fact, I would
objective
actually say,
meaning you
as
can
an
appeal to say they
atheist,
shouldn't take the easy route out?
my life is finite, it's not infinite. So I think this life has more value because this is all I have. So I don't get this morning back. I don't think I live for infinity, and I spent it with you guys. That tells me that I think there's something important about thinking and relationships and growing. So not believing in God, I think actually makes life more purposeful and meaningful. Over here, I want
Well,
to make
that's
sure
a
people
nice
can
cliched thing for him to say, but again, what he made is, and this I've wanted to talk about this more because this happened with Jordan Peterson and William Lane Craig when they shared a stage. But William Lane Craig kind of gave this dichotomy. Well, if there is no God, there's no ultimate purpose, and Jordan Peterson kind of got up there, and it seemed like he was disagreeing, but I don't think he was, because he basically says, well, look, here we have this question of, is there objective purpose? And I think that's a stupid question. Of course there's objective purpose. And here's the point that atheist Sean McDowell is making, where it's like, of course you'd get on the football and just play. Of course you'd find meaning in it. Okay, but that's an epistemological level to just say it's intuitively obvious that there's meaning and purpose. But that's not the same as answering the ontological question, which he's merely just asserted.
follow up with their questions as well. I don't want to filibuster here. Oh, okay, go ahead.
So if the Bible contains hundreds of prophecies fulfilled after they were written, even being fulfilled like as of now in the 21st century, how would that be possible without a omniscient God?
So give me one example of a prophecy you think, like the virgin birth or something, or which?
No, like the measuring of Israel in the end times.
Which one?
Measuring of Israel in the end times.
Okay, we can't deal with something in the end times because it hasn't been fulfilled yet.
Well, it's being fulfilled now.
So give me an example of a prophecy.
I'm unfamiliar with this one, so I might just not be able to comment on this
You
part.
think it's supernatural.
I mean, you could go with the birth of Jesus or the crucifixion of Jesus.
Birth of Jesus or the crucifixion of Jesus?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the birth of Jesus. Okay, since you started there. When that prophecy was written according to you, before Jesus came on the scene, in the book of Micah, correct?
I believe so.
It is correct. So,
Of course, Sean knows.
claims to be the Messiah. Would he have been aware of this prophecy?
Which that really tells you something, doesn't it?
Are you asking me the question?
Yeah.
When a Christian is better at making atheist arguments than most
Yeah, I guess
atheists.
so, yeah.
Well, of course he was, right? In Luke chapter 2, Jesus knew the law so well, even the leaders reflected upon this, okay? I don't think Jesus is real. I'm telling the story from your perspective. Jesus would have known this prophecy. So if he's trying to proclaim himself as the Messiah, do you think by the time he's 33, 3 decades removed from this, he would start telling people that he's from the area of Bethlehem, and later followers who believe this would start telling that as well? The answer is, of course. So I would need some actual proof that he's from that area and didn't invent this like he did other prophecies to believe it's really supernatural. And the evidence that Jesus is from Bethlehem outside of the Gospels only emerges in the 3rd century, 300 years removed.
Oh,
So I don't buy it.
I was actually paying a lot of attention to the live chat, but I did catch that claim that no evidence for Jesus exists until the 3rd century. Even Bart Ehrman would, I think, laugh at that. The easiest thing we can obviously go to is the creed that Paul cites in 1 Corinthians 15. Goes back to an oral tradition within 5 years of Jesus' resurrection. And then, I think there is a case that can be made that most, if not all, the New Testament was written prior to 70 AD. I think I take Frank Turek's and J. Warner Wallace's view on that. But even if you don't go with that, you can take Even if you can take a more generous view, even Bart Ehrman's view would say most of it's written at least in the 2nd century. So I don't know where he gets this 3rd century claim from, unless I just completely missed the context for it.
You can give me another example, we could talk about it. But either the prophecies, you have people writing the New Testament, reading back on the Old Testament, pulling things out of context, like the virgin birth. If you actually read Isaiah 7 on the virgin birth, it has nothing to do with the Messiah. And the Hebrew word is for a young girl, not even a virgin. And the New Testament writers apply that as if to Jesus.
So, and when he just makes these claims about the Greek, I'm sure he's probably right about it. But again, he knows he can use it against them, and we were there on studied on it. But here's the thing. Actually, this is quite devious of Sean, and I mean that in the most complimentary way possible, because it's brilliant actually. There is some truth to this idea that Christians were reading back into the Old Testament with whether it was regard to specific prophecies that had to be fulfilled, or even just references to the Messiah in general. There is some truth to that, and the reason was because in the context of the way Judaism was developing, a lot of the predictions or things discussing about the Messiah went through this in my go back and look at my video where I responded to Ben Shapiro. A lot of the stuff regarding the Messiah was misunderstood by Judaism. They didn't understand necessarily everything going on in the Old Testament with regards to the Messiah. And so, yeah, it wasn't until Jesus came and did what he did and rose from the dead that their eyes were opened and they realized, oh, that's the way we should have understood the Old Testament. So there is some truth to this idea that they're kind of looking in retrospect and connecting prophecies and descriptions of the Messiah to Jesus. But the reason is because Jesus fulfills it in a way that they weren't expecting him to fulfill it. But it doesn't mean that they're deceitfully misrepresenting the Old Testament. It's just that now they have a lens to actually interpret it entirely properly, whereas before they didn't have that. And I'm sure you can think of examples of your own life where you look back on things and you think, oh, I should have understood what was going on, and I just ignored all the signs that, whatever it was. I'm not talking about supernatural signs or anything like that, but like just very practical things that I'm sure you can think of. But anyway, yeah, let's finish this out. I'm gonna close the show out in about 10 minutes or so. So if you have any last minute questions you want to get in, go ahead.
When it was never implied that way in the Old Testament. Or people like Jesus intentionally try to fulfill him because they're aware of him, and he's trying to convince people he's the Messiah.
Yes, Jesus intentionally rose from the dead just to ad hocly fill a prophecy.
He wanted to as well. Like when Jesus says, his return, people in this generation will see it. Well, we're at least 20 generations after this plus, and Jesus.
That's incorrect.
Come back.
That's incorrect. People love to launch that in this. Go read the passage. They're asking Jesus what the end times are going to look like, and Jesus is comparing what the end times are going to look like to the destruction of the temple. And when he says this generation will not pass away till these things have been fulfilled, he's talking about the destruction of the temple, and that was true. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD. What is that? 40 years. What is that? 1 generation. So Jesus was right that this generation will not pass away till these things, specifically regarding the destruction of the temple, will be fulfilled. And what is that analogous to? The end times. So again, brilliantly deceitful here.
So I don't buy the positive prophecies, and I think there's examples of false prophecies.
Is this on? Ooh, that's loud. Hi. I just like to say thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And from here, it looks like you have a wedding ring on. Are you married?
Am I married?
Where's this
really
going?
Personal.
Just answer.
Just answer. Wow.
Yes, sir. What is your standard for love? If you have no foundation in Jesus, I see no reason to love people at all. So what's your standard?
Well, okay. I can tell you my standard is not Jesus. Because despite what people say, he did and believed a lot of things we all know are not loving. And I'll give you some examples of this.
Uh-oh.
Supposedly there's demons. Wait, don't leave. She might want to follow back up. Don't leave her. Oh, you do have the mic. Supposedly there's demons, and instead of casting them out, he runs them into a herd owner's pigs and sends, 2,000 pigs into the ocean. Like, why would Jesus, if he was God, he didn't have to ruin the guy's herd. That didn't sound very loving to me. Second, Jesus believes in the Old Testament.
Actually,
a lot of the violence in the Old Testament.
actually, quite the contrary. I mean, I'm trying to remember the specific passage. I don't remember specifically where it is, but I remember the story pretty rightly. Jesus is about to just exorcise these demons, and these demons are terrified of Jesus. And what did they ask? They ask, "Hey, please send us into the pigs instead of into," I forget the word they use, abyss or something. They didn't want to go back to hell or Hades or wherever they were because of how terrible it was. And they said, "Please, Lord Jesus, send us into these pigs." And guess what? Jesus sends them into the pigs. What does that tell you? It tells you that Jesus was merciful even on the demons. And I don't know entirely what to make of that, but I just know that it's something to think about and just consider.
That's hardly the kind of thing a loving God would do. So I don't look to the Bible for love. Now, are there some things Jesus taught that were good? Sure. Like loving your enemies, that's a pretty powerful teaching Jesus he taught. I'm okay with that. My standard of love doesn't come from some ancient book written 2,000 years ago. It comes from common sense and reflection on how human beings best flourish.
That's idiotic. Because most of the things we take for common sense on how human beings best flourish came from the Judeo-Christian worldview, period. We don't know it because we come up in this culture today. We just take all these, like he just mentioned, loving your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Where did that idea came from? It came from a Judeo-Christian worldview. That is not a common sense worldview. The common sense worldview was you take vengeance on your enemies, not love them and pray for those who persecute you. That's not a common sense thing. That was not the common sense of most of humanity through the most of history. Loving your enemies, forgiveness was seen as a weakness. It was not seen as a moral virtue. Prior to modern Christendom. Where's Tom Holland's book? Tom Holland's book, Dominion, or Ben Shapiro's The Right Side of History. We'll lay that out for you. Take a look at that thing. But these ideas that these things are just common sense and people take for granted where they came from. Even Tom Holland, I don't know if he's a Christian now. I know he wasn't a Christian when he wrote that, and yet he still saw that. So you don't have to be a Christian to recognize where the values came from, but they're far from just common sense, part and parcel of being a human being. That is one of the silliest things I've ever heard.
My wife, and I say, what words can I say that are kind to her? How can I treat her respectfully? How do I be a good husband? How do I be a good dad? How do I be faithful to her? Like these, you might say these are Christian values, but they're also Buddhist values. They're also Hindu values. That's because they're human values.
No, Buddha left his wife and kid to pursue nirvana. They are not Buddhist values.
So I don't need an ancient book to know what it means to love my wife. In fact, I think that ancient book wouldn't help me because the way it treats women, but separate issue. Go ahead. Are you done, or did you want to come back? Are you married? Definitely not.
So if you believe in things from a scientific standpoint, you do, right? Like scientific?
I couldn't quite make that out.
You believe in things from a scientific
Okay, this will definitely be the last
perspective?
one.
Like the creation and life, you based around science?
I honestly, for some reason, the echo, I believe what?
Do you believe in creation from a scientific perspective?
Do I believe creation from a scientific perspective? I don't believe creation from any perspective.
Okay. Well, then what are your thoughts on just like the law of conservation of matter and how things can't be created or destroyed? You said how you think the universe is constantly expanding.
Okay, so slow down. The first law of thermodynamics, which you call the law of conservation of energy, says that matter is neither created nor destroyed, correct?
Yes.
Who believes matter was created? You or me?
Well, I was thinking you, because you
No,
talked about-
I just said I don't believe matter was created because that implies a creator. Are you a Christian? You believe in God.
Yes.
So you believe matter was created. The
Yeah.
first law that you cited says matter is neither created nor destroyed. That's not a problem for me. I don't think it was created or destroyed. I say, yep, that's scientific fact. You're the one who believes it was created.
So how do you think the universe is expanding without matter being created?
How is it expanding?
You said how you thought the universe was.
Oh,
expanding.
that's easy. Put buttons on a balloon. If you expand the balloon, what happens? The buttons get further and further from one another. There's not more matter. It's an expansion of the existing matter.
So it's just more empty space growing?
Well, yeah, you could look at it that way. It gets more precise than that, but yeah, it's
Okay,
not
yeah,
the
I don't really have
constant
anything
creation.
to say on what they're talking about now, so I'm going to finish watching that. I would highly suggest, recommend you guys go watch that video by Sean McDowell. Apparently, at the end, he takes off his glasses, kind of a Superman type deal, and reveals who he is and what he's doing. Mr. Brass, my good friend, if morality comes from God's commands, then how is Cain killing Abel immoral? Because God never told him not to kill Abel. First of all, you don't know that he told him not to kill Abel, but second of all, I'm not a divine command theorist, right? Divine command theorists would say, yes, morality stems from God's commands. However, what I would take is a combination of divine command theory and purpose theory, which is to say God's commands aren't arbitrary, but they express God's character. So God's character is essentially loving and kind and wanting the best for humanity. And then, so his commands are an expression of that. But also, I believe that there's a telos to humanity, which is humanity's created for a purpose. And God clearly did lay out that the purpose for them, at least because they were bringing sacrifices to God. So in some sense, they both clearly were in communication with God and knew what God wanted of them. They knew what their purpose was, because their purpose was to provide sacrifices for God. So even as far back as Cain and Abel, there had to be at least a sense that we're guilty of our sin. We've fallen short of the Creator, and there has to be some kind of sacrifice to make amends, to reconcile us to God. And that was for Abel in the form of the flocks that he gave the sacrifices, and Cain, he was a tiller of the ground, in the form of the fruits and vegetables that he gave. And so they both had an understanding of what their purpose was. And so Cain knew full well that he was violating his purpose out of anger towards God. For whatever reason his sacrifice wasn't accepted, instead of looking to himself to see where he came up short and fell wrong, he took vengeance primarily on God, but in the form of taking out Abel. And so Cain knew full well that he was violating Abel's purpose. He was violating his own purpose to take vengeance on God. So that's why that's immoral. But yeah, so I don't see any more questions. It's officially 9:30. I've been going for an hour. So listen, thank you everybody for being here. I hate to cut it off, because I see there are conversations going on in the live chat. Hopefully you guys will be able to continue them at some point with one another. Again, subscribe, hit the notification bell if you're watching on JMD's channel, which is, it's more likely that you are. Listen, I just please ask that you would head on over to my channel, subscribe, click notification bells. The link is in the description. The Unapologetic Apologists. And if you like what we're doing, listen. July 5th, I have a debate coming up. I'm going to be on the gospel truth, debating whether or not the mind is evidence for God. June 16th, I believe it is, Joe Schmidt's coming on the show. I think I referenced that earlier. And behind the scenes, there is a project I'm working on. I can't give you all the details yet, but I can tell you who's involved right now. It's Braxton Hunter, Tim Stratton, and Luke Barnes. So I'm really excited for that. So we're doing a lot of exciting things. If you would like to be able to support that, to see more coming out from the Unapologetic Apologists, subscribestar.com/TUA. But again, what you can do for absolutely free is just subscribe and comment. Let me know what you guys want to see on the show. Let me know what you thought. Go watch Sean McDowell's video and let me know what you guys thought of it. And until next time, I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much, and God